what's up? This is Odolena from Odolena Digital. Welcome to my channel. Every Sunday I post a new video on some of my favorite topics, like reviews of my favorite books, education, culture, society, politics, history. I work for Google, but everything that I share here is my own personal opinion. Having said that, today I'm going to talk for a second time about this book by Thomas Sowell, Black Rednecks and White Liberals, Part 2. I started this book, and this is literally one of the most interesting books that I've read in 2020, and I read many books this year, is because it kind of gives a different perspective to the whole discussion that became very, very important over the summer with Black Lives Matter. A lot of talks and a lot of people sharing their opinion without really being super informed about history, society and economics. And Thomas Sowell is informed about all of them very, very well. Thomas Sowell is an American professor. He's Afro-American himself, and in this book he shares his perspective on the influence of culture on achievements in certain communities. The main focus, of course, is Black Afro-Americans, why they have significantly less wealth, significantly less achievements in education than disproportionately compared to the whites. And in this book he focuses on the topic of culture. And he believes, against the popular opinion of white liberals, the problem is not about policies, it's not about the government intervening and making changes in order to enable black people to achieve the same and higher results than the average white. It has to do with culture, and he proves very well that different blacks being exposed to different cultures and kind of adopting microcultures have achieved very different results compared to the majority. In the second part of this review, I'm going to talk a little bit about the others. So he compares other minorities and how they have dealt with racism, with prejudice, because this is not something unique to black people. It has been happening with Jews, with Asians, like Asian Americans have faced tremendous hostility and mocking and all kind of racial prejudice. But at the moment, an average Asian American has better credit score than average white American. They have higher test results than average white children, both in university, in college, and in all the levels of the educational system. So this has nothing to do with special policies that the government has taken. It has to do with special government intervention. He believes that this has to do only with the culture, and let's say the emphasis on productive features within a culture versus the emphasis on unproductive or counterproductive features in other cultures. So he argues basically that a lot of blacks, after the freedom of slavery, adopted a lot of negative features from the redneck culture of the Southerners, the poor Southern people, Southern whites, who were mainly settlers from Northern England and Scotland. Equally, immigrants from Europe, like the Jews, the Germans, like the Lebanese who immigrated across a variety of countries, like Chinese who immigrated to Southeastern Asia. They all carry different cultures, and regardless the fact how low in society they started, many of them came with nothing, immigrated literally with one bag of clothes or even less, no money, no inheritance, no property. So the argument about lack of inheritance and lack of property because blacks were slaves in the past does not really work here, because these people were arriving with much less. Let's say their situation arriving in the United States wasn't much better than the of the descendants of free slaves, but nevertheless, over a few generations, and even some of them faster, they were able to become wealthier, to establish businesses, networks, and to essentially a few generations later on, their children would be dominating science, technology, having a lot of high prestigious positions and jobs, especially the ones that require a significant amount of academic achievements. For example, I work for Google, and I visited the American campus, the Mountain View. So many Asian Americans. I'm not saying it with anything to do with race, but it's just obvious. I also visited Stanford. Asian Americans and Asian students, so many of them. It seems that there is this kind of category of these cultures. He calls them the middleman cultures in many cases. They would focus, let's say, on achievements from early age, so children will be strongly encouraged to study hard. In general, discipline is valued a lot. Achievements, let's say, saving, investing, and delaying gratification, saving the money today for the future, for education, for property, making sure that you invest in the business. Everybody works from early age. Hard work is paid off. These kind of beliefs are, let's say, the traits of cultures that produced a lot of achievements, and they did this despite the same problems that they were facing with race. They were facing problems with some of them, the parents didn't even speak the language well when they first arrived in the United States, and still they ended up better off than a lot of Black Americans. And what he argues is that, say, the examples of where Black Americans were achieving significantly higher success than average whites, and that was happening long before the civil rights movements in the 40s, in the 30s, 50s. They were Black students that would go to Harvard, that would achieve significantly high positions and competitive jobs. They would be like in military, medicine, doctors, lawyers, judges, despite, of course, the existing racism and segregation. And he believes that the reason why they did this was, again, culture. These were Black people who have adopted a certain productive culture oriented towards results. And he gives example with a high school in Chicago, the Dunbar High School, which produced pretty much a variety of very, very accomplished Black people in America before any civil rights movement. How did this happen? This was not a publicly funded school. It was a public school, but it was not well funded. It was a segregated school, so it was only Black students. How come they achieved such high results? And he believes, and he gives a lot of examples, that segregation and desegregation of classrooms has nothing to do with essentially the results of the students. He believes that funding, underfunding, overfunding has nothing to do with the achievement of the school. Of course, it can help out, but it is not the decision that moves, let's say, the scores of the students. And let's say their academic achievements are not coming from external policies. They're coming from the culture of these students. Are these motivated students? Are they there knowing that this is the school where it will be tough on them, that they will have to study hard, and let's say they are motivated and they're willing to go through this because they know this is what they want. He argues that there is more kind of old school study hard and focus on the test result approach is needed, rather than the modern ideas of teaching all kind of, like he mentions, all kind of different liberal type of schools. He gives also examples of new fashions like teaching students pride, teaching students history, kind of like a twisted idea of history. And he believes like, okay, with all these policies, with all these efforts, what are the results? The end line, he believes, is that schools, before this kind of all policies and interventions from mainly white liberal politicians and theoreticians, Black people were doing better and achieving more than what happened after. And finally, he attacks the idea of, let's say, the guilt of the Western white person, the guilt of white Americans, of white Western Europeans. In a way, there is this concept now, and it's becoming even more trendy with talks about the white fragility, the white privilege, that are becoming widely accepted, that for some reason, because you are descendant of white Western or white Americans, you have to feel privileged, that let's say you should discard all your achievements because you've been privileged since birth, and because the color of your face in a way is predetermining your destiny, which he believes is absolutely wrong. And not only wrong, it's actually dangerous, because this is undermining the results and the achievements of a culture which has achieved more and contributed more to the world than any non-Western culture. The ideas of liberty, the ideas of free market economics, the ideas of technology and innovation, industrialization, democracy, all these things are coming from the Western world, and we should be careful when discarding them and when blaming, let's say, and focusing on the bad things that the Western did. So he gives an example. Would it be a better world if the Western countries never conquered anybody? They stayed in Europe or in the United States, and they never had slaves, they never conquered any Indian, they didn't take the land away. Would actually the indigenous people be better off then or now? Or let's say their descendants, compared to, let's say, what would have happened if nothing had changed, and what would have happened if things went in history the way they did? Who is better off? Is it the descendants of modern day American Indians who, let's say, have access to education, access to the same rights and privileges like everybody else? Or if they had stayed the way they were 200 years ago, with horses, with a very primitive state of living. So same he mentions about colonies, like actually colonies and colonization of these countries led to spreading up Western European liberal ideas, Western European ideas of progress, education. The way they spread them, of course, it was their way, but the argument is the descendants of these people, would have they been better if they've never been colonized, or would they have been better off if they had contact with these Western cultures? Some examples include India, which is often mentioned as kind of like the pearl in the British Empire crown. Well, India was more expensive for England than it was actually producing when it comes to incomes. So this is kind of like the false idea that white Western cultures became profitable, became rich because of slavery and colonization. In fact, the southern states of the United States, which were, let's say, the slave owner states, were much less developed and much less well off economically as a whole than all the northern states way before the Civil War. And precisely you could quote that the reason of this could be that they depended on slavery, which was not a progressive way of working, whereas the northern states depended much more on machines, depending on technology, development of new ways of doing work more effectively. He mentions here, and I think it's absolutely critical, is that if we continue denying all the achievements of the West because of fake guilt sense, or because of the bad things that have happened with slavery and with colonization, which did happen, we also endanger this internally, leads to internal instability, which we see now in America and also in Europe, kind of polarization of opinions, and also from external instability, because there are a lot of non-Western countries which have different ideologies and which would like to see the West and America polarized and would like to see them unstable. So having said that, I will finish my review here. I would strongly recommend you to read this book, to check it out, and before making any arguments, before judging it from the title. I know it's easy and it's tempting to say something just before you know anything about the book in detail. I would challenge you to just read it, be open-minded, and then talk about race, about privilege, and anything you want. Thanks a lot for watching. Please subscribe to this channel, and I will share a new video next week. Until then, see you soon.